He was standing in my kitchen shirtless, barefoot, and tearing into shredded cheese right from the bag. My shredded cheese. The expensive kind too. The 4-cheese Mexican blend I'd treated myself to at Whole Foods. Orange crumbs speckled his chest hair as he slowly turned toward me, pupils blown wide like he'd stared into the sun too long. My mom runs this HOA, he slurred, casually dropping a packet of taco seasoning onto my spotless hardwood floor. The thing burst open on impact, sending a paprika and cumin cloud drifting through my kitchen like a budget smoke bomb. This house isn't even yours anymore, bro. I stood frozen in the doorway, gym bag still slung across my shoulder, trying to comprehend the circus unfolding in front of me. This 20-something overgrown boy had somehow broken into my home and was now claiming squatters' rights because of his mother's position in our homeowners association. The situation would have been hilarious if it weren't happening in my actual kitchen at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. That's when I quietly pressed the panic button under the counter. I'd installed it months earlier, hidden just beneath the edge of the granite slab, invisible unless you knew precisely where it lived. My fingers slid to it easily while I kept my expression neutral, maintaining steady eye contact with the intruder. "You want some water?" I asked, moving slowly toward the refrigerator. "You look a little dehydrated." He squinted suspiciously before shrugging, then returned to devouring my cheese like a raccoon with a grocery habit. 7 minutes later, the cops arrived, red and blue lights splashing across my living room walls. By then, he had migrated to my Italian leather couch, lounging in nothing but boxers and a cardboard Burger King crown from some kid's meal. I still have no idea where he got the crown. It definitely wasn't mine. Officers Martinez and Chen stepped inside and froze at the sight. Tanner Drebuk, son of our neighborhood's infamous HOA president, sprawled across my furniture like a discount Caesar, his fingers coated in cheese dust as he tried to explain how his mother had authorized him to repossess my property. "Officers," he began, wobbling to his feet. "There's been a misunderstanding. My mother, Nancy Drebuk, she runs the Juniper Crossings Homeowners Association, and this man," he pointed at me with a greasy orange finger, "he's violating multiple bylaws. We're conducting an emergency seizure." Officer Chen looked at him, then at me, then back at him. "Sir," she asked calmly, "is this your home?" "Yes, officer," I replied. "Trevor Hanley. I own this house. Deed, mortgage, everything. This guy broke in while I was at the gym." "That's a lie," Tanner shouted, his Burger King crown sliding sideways. "My mom said this property is under HOA jurisdiction pending compliance review. I have every right to be here. But let me step back to understand how we reached the point where a half-naked man wearing a fast food crown was being handcuffed in my living room. You need to know about Nancy Drebuk and the iron-fisted regime she built over our once peaceful neighborhood. My name is Trevor Hanley. I moved to Juniper Crossings 3 years ago. I'm a software architect, mostly working from home, and I chose this community for the quiet streets, tall oak trees, and solid 1990s built houses. HOA fees were a reasonable $200 a month. We had a pool, tennis courts, and nicely maintained green spaces. It seemed ideal. What I didn't know was that, 6 months before I arrived, Nancy had orchestrated what longtime residents referred to only as the coup. She forcibly pushed out the old HOA board using a barrage of procedural complaints, then replaced them with her hand-picked loyalists. By the time I moved in, she ruled Juniper Crossings as if it were her private nation-state. Nancy was 54, though she'd never admit it. Her face had that stretched, shiny look that too much Botox creates, and she lived exclusively in designer yoga pants, despite never once being spotted in a yoga studio. Her bleached blonde hair was always pulled into the same severe ponytail, and she drove a white Range Rover with a vanity plate that read, "Ha Boss." Her two passions in life: enforcing HOA bylaws with the zeal of a medieval inquisitor, and coddling her 23-year-old son, Tanner, who had flunked his way through 4 community colleges, and now lived in her guest house. His official role was HOA social media manager. In reality, Tanner spent his days posting shirtless gym selfies on the neighborhood Nextdoor page and attempting to flirt with married Women at the community pool. He shared his mother's entitlement but lacked her strategic thinking, making him irritating but predictable. My first encounter with Nancy happened just 2 months after I moved in. I was working in my home office when I heard sharp knocking at the door. I opened it to find Nancy standing there with a clipboard and a face twisted into disapproval. "Mr. Hanley," she said curtly, "I'm here about your mailbox." "My mailbox?" She pointed toward the perfectly fine black mailbox at the end of the driveway. "It is not regulation height. HOA bylaws state that mailboxes must be between 41 and 45 inches from ground level. Yours is 46.5. You measured my mailbox," I said, incredulous. "I measure all mailboxes," she replied. "Part of my duties as HOA president. You have 7 days to correct the violation or you'll receive a $50 fine for 1.5 inches. Rules are rules, Mr. Hanley. Standards maintain property values." That was my introduction to Nancy's brand of neighborhood tyranny. Over the next year, I got citations for grass that grew 1/4 inch too tall, a garden hose visible from the street for 3 hours, and Christmas lights removed on January 2nd instead of January 1st. I paid the fines, made the fixes, and tried to stay invisible. I had more important things to do than argue with the power-hungry suburban monarch, but Nancy always found new ways to terrorize residents. She initiated surprise yard inspections with her tape measure and camera. She created a newsletter compliance corner where she publicly shamed violators with photos. She even tried to pass a rule requiring residents to submit interior paint samples for approval before repainting inside their own homes. That one only died after someone pointed out it was probably illegal. Tanner was her shadow. He followed her around, taking notes, occasionally chiming in with gems like, "That's definitely not regulation beige," or, "You can see their trash cans from here, Mom." Their dynamic was a spectacle. Nancy treated him like a permanent child, cutting crusts off his sandwiches and bragging about her baby. Tanner, who had never held a real job, was perfectly content to live off her alimony from her third divorce. "Tanner is pursuing his passion," Nancy would say. "He's an entrepreneur, a social media influencer." Reality? Tanner had 73 Instagram followers, most of them his mother's friends guilt following him. His entrepreneurship included a protein powder pyramid scheme, a car detailing business that lasted exactly one customer, and a crypto day trading attempt that burned through $4,000 of Nancy's money. But Nancy remained willfully blind to both her son's incompetence and the neighborhood's resentment. She truly believed she was safeguarding property values and preserving order. The fact that those property values had actually dropped under her leadership was, in her mind, because residents weren't following her rules strictly enough. Things between us escalated over something as simple as paint. My shutters had faded under the Florida sun, so I decided to repaint them. They were originally boring builder beige. I wanted a fresh look, so I chose a classic, elegant navy blue. Tasteful, not flashy. I didn't think I needed approval. The bylaws mentioned exterior paint, but seemed focused on main structures, not shutters. Plenty of neighbors had colorful front doors without issue. I spent a Saturday repainting them carefully. They looked incredible afterwards. By Monday morning, a notice was taped to my front door. Urgent compliance violation. Unauthorized exterior modification. Fine. $500. An additional $100 per day until rectified. A $500 fine for painting the shutters on my own house, the house I bought, paid for, and maintained with my own money. I tried to handle it like an adult. I called Nancy, left a polite voicemail asking if we could talk it through. She never returned the call. I emailed her, attaching photos of other homes in the neighborhood with shutters that were definitely not beige. She replied with one sentence, "Those properties have grandfather clauses. Yours does not." So I went to the next HOA board meeting, held on a Thursday evening in the community center. About 15 residents showed up, most looking like they'd been living under the same oppressive cloud I had. Nancy sat at the head of the room behind a folding table, flanked by her 2 board members, 2 women who appeared terrified of disagreeing with her. When it was time for resident concerns, I stood up, I'd like to discuss the $500 fine for my shutters, I said evenly. Nancy didn't lift her gaze from her paperwork. The fine stands. Next question. I'd like to understand why my navy shutters are a violation when the Johnsons have green shutters and the Perez's have burgundy ones. As I stated in my email, she said, finally glancing up. Those properties have grandfather clauses. Can I see documentation for these grandfather clauses? Nancy's head snapped up fully this time, her eyes narrowing with icy disdain. Are you questioning my authority, Mr. Hanley? I'm asking to see documentation for a $500 fine. That seems reasonable. The HOA board has final say on compliance issues. The documentation is proprietary. Proprietary? I repeated. These are neighborhood rules, not corporate secrets. A ripple of murmurs ran through the seated residents. Nancy's Botox-tight face flushed. Mr. Hanley, you are out of order. If you continue to disrupt this meeting, I'll have you removed. By whom? There's no security. Tanner, Nancy called sharply. Out from behind the coffee machine stepped her son, wearing a cheap t-shirt with the word security ironed on in crooked letters. Obviously, a DIY job, courtesy of his mother. You need to leave, bro, Tanner said, trying for intimidating but sounding like he'd memorized lines from some bargain bin action movie. I scanned the room. A few neighbors were struggling not to laugh. Fine, I said. But this isn't over. Nancy made sure of that. The very next issue of her Compliance Corner newsletter featured my house on the front page. The headline blared, "Resident refuses to maintain standards." A photo of my navy shutters was circled in bright red. The article painted me as a selfish troublemaker, reducing property values for everyone. It didn't stop there. Violation notices began appearing non-stop. My car was allegedly parked 2 inches past the line in my own driveway. My oak tree had excessive acorns. My doormat was deemed excessively worn. Each offense came with a fine usually between $50 and $100. Then Tanner started showing up. The first time, I caught him skulking around my backyard, snapping photos of my fence. "What are you doing?" I demanded, stepping out through the sliding door. "HOA inspection," he said flatly, not even pretending to feel awkward about trespassing. "Your fence has mildew." "That's not mildew, it's shadows from the trees." "Looks like mildew to me." "Mom's gonna fine you." "Get off my property, Tanner." "It's not really your property, bro. The HOA has easement rights for inspections." "No, it doesn't." "Leave before I call the police." He smirked and wandered off, taking more photos as he retreated. It only escalated from there. I'd catch him peering over my fence at random hours. He'd leave HOA brochures under my windshield wipers even during rainstorms. Came home to find him measuring my driveway with the tape measure. "It's 36 inches too wide," he announced. "The driveway was here when I bought the house. Doesn't matter. Regulations are regulations." So I documented everything, every absurd violation, every unwanted visit, every instance of trespassing. I installed security cameras on all sides of my house, ensuring Tanner's antics were captured in high-definition clarity. I had a feeling the evidence would matter someday. Meanwhile, the shutters stayed navy blue. I refused to repaint them. I refused to pay the fine. Nancy responded with increasingly hostile letters threatening legal action, liens, and forced compliance procedures. I ignored them and dug deeper into HOA law. Turned out Nancy had been bending rules like a pretzel. The bylaws required a formal hearing for any fine over $200. I never received one. Architectural changes had to be reviewed by a committee, not approved solely by Nancy, and nothing in the bylaws allowed daily accumulating fines without proper notice and time to remedy. So I drafted a formal letter detailing every violation she'd committed against her own rules. I sent copies to all board members, certified mail. I expected her to ease off. Instead, she went nuclear. Contractors I'd never contacted started showing up, offering quotes to repaint my shutters. Pizza deliveries arrived at random hours. My mailbox exploded with junk mail from dozens of mailing lists I never signed up for. Then came the night someone tried to break in. It was a Tuesday, my usual late gym night. I liked going when it was quiet, usually staying until 10 or 10:30. When I pulled into my driveway, something felt wrong immediately. My front door was slightly ajar, and lights were on inside that I knew I'd turned off. I sat in the car for a moment, debating. The smart move was to call the police, but I already had a strong suspicion of who was inside, and I wanted to confirm it. I entered quietly, phone in hand, ready to dial 911. Someone was humming off-key in the kitchen while rummaging through my refrigerator. The air was thick and stifling. My thermostat had been cranked to 85 degrees, and I could hear the AC straining. I crept through the living room. My TV was on, playing some trashy courtroom reality show. When I reached the kitchen, my suspicion was confirmed. There stood Tanner Drebuck, in his boxers, acting like he owned the place. Empty beer bottles. My beer lined the counter. A frozen pizza. My frozen pizza was baking in the oven. He was eating my expensive shredded cheese straight from the bag while flipping through my mail. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I barked. He spun around, startled, cheese falling from his mouth. Then he grinned the strangest grin I'd ever seen. "Oh, hey bro," he said casually, as if I'd just walked into his home. "Your pizza's almost done. Get out now." That's when he said it. The sentence that would become legendary in neighborhood gossip circles for years to come. "My mom runs this HOA. This house isn't even yours anymore, bro." He launched into an intoxicated rant, explaining that his mother had activated some imaginary emergency clause that supposedly let the HOA confiscate properties that violated compliance standards. According to him, my home had already been taken over by the HOA, and he had been personally dispatched to supervise the transition. "You can't just take someone's house," I said, forcing myself to stay calm, even as anger simmered under the surface. "We can. And we did," he slurred, grabbing yet another handful of my cheese. "Mom says you're a hostile resident. Hostile residents forfeit property rights. It's in the bylaws." No, it wasn't. Section 8.7b of the Exterior Compliance Charter? He had clearly made it up on the spot. "Prove it," I said. The absurdity of debating fictional legal codes, with a drunk 23-year-old standing in my kitchen in nothing but boxers, finally hit me. That's when I remembered the panic button I'd installed under the counter, part of the security upgrade I'd put in place after Tanner's trespassing escalated. I had a feeling it might be useful someday. Today was absolutely that day. "You want something to drink?" I asked, stepping casually toward the refrigerator. "You look like you could use some water." "I want another beer," he said. "How about a Fresca? I know I've got some in here somewhere." While pretending to dig through the fridge, my fingers found the panic button tucked beneath the counter. I pressed it firmly once, knowing it would instantly alert the police with my address and a break-in code. "No Fresca," I said, shutting the fridge. "But the police should be here soon." "Police?" Tanner snorted. "For what? I told you my mom runs this place. Cops work for her." "That's not how anything works, Tanner. You don't get it," he said, stepping closer, still clutching fistfuls of my cheese. "My mom owns this neighborhood. She owns you. And now she owns this house. You should probably start packing." He wandered into my living room and flopped onto my couch, feet on the coffee table, remote in hand, flipping through channels while dropping cheese crumbs everywhere. I stayed in the kitchen, watching through the doorway, listening for sirens. It took roughly 7 minutes before red and blue lights flashed through my front windows. "Pizza's ready," I called to Tanner as I pulled the pizza from the oven. "Bring it here," he ordered, eyes glued to the TV. "Sure thing." Instead, I walked straight to the front door and opened it just as Officers Martinez and Chen approached. I recognized both from earlier neighborhood calls. "Mr. Hanley," Officer Martinez said. "We got an alert about a break-in." "Yes, officer. He's in the living room." Tanner Drebuck. "He broke in while I was at the gym." We stepped into the living room to find Tanner wearing a crooked Burger King crown, lounging in my boxers, still devouring my cheese. "Officers," he said, attempting to stand, but swaying sideways. "Perfect timing. I need you to escort this man off the HOA property." Officer Chen looked at me. "Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes, officer." Trevor Hanley, I own this home. That's a lie, Tanner shouted. My mom runs the HOA. She sees this property under Section 8.7b of the Exterior Compliance Charter. Sir, Officer Martinez said patiently, turning to Tanner, I'm going to need you to put some clothes on. I don't take orders from you. Tanner said, puffing out his chest. My mother is Nancy Drebuck. She runs this entire neighborhood. You have zero authority here. Sir, you are in someone else's home without permission. That's breaking and entering. It's not breaking and entering when you own the place. Do you own this house? Officer Chen asked. The HOA owns it now, and my mom runs the HOA, so technically, yeah, I own it. The officers exchanged a look that clearly said they had dealt with entitled drunk kids before. But this was an entirely new flavor of delusion. Sir, stand up and put your hands behind your back, Officer Martinez instructed. You're seriously arresting me? Do you even know who my mother is? Sir, please comply. Tanner staggered to his feet, the Burger King crown slipping further to one side. This is illegal detention. I have HOA immunity. That's not a thing, Officer Chen said as he pulled out his cuffs. It is a thing. Call my mom. She'll tell you. As if summoned by the universe itself, Nancy's white Range Rover screeched to a stop in front of my house. She must have been monitoring the police scanner, or one of her neighborhood spies tipped her off. She stormed through my still open front door like some vengeance-driven suburban angel in full Lululemon. What is going on here? She shrieked, as she spotted her son in cuffs and boxers. Ma'am, your son broke into this residence, Officer Martinez explained calmly. That is impossible. This house is under HOA seizure. Ma'am, and HOA cannot seize homes, Officer Chen said. That's not how property law works. I am the president of this HOA. I know exactly how property law works. Then you should know breaking and entering is a felony, Martinez replied. Nancy's face cycled through multiple shades of red. This is a setup. Trevor Hanley has been harassing my son. Ma'am, Officer Chen said. Your son is drunk, in his underwear, inside Mr. Hanley's home, eating his food. We have to arrest him, Officer Martinez said. For WHAT, Nancy screamed. Breaking and entering, trespassing, theft, Martinez said. Shall I continue? Theft? He didn't steal anything. Officer Chen pointed directly at Tanner. Sir, whose bathrobe is that? I looked again and sure enough, Tanner had my bathrobe draped over his shoulders like a superhero cape. In all the chaos, I hadn't even noticed. It's mine, I said. That's my bathrobe. I was cold, Tanner protested. He keeps it too cold in here. You turned my thermostat to 85, I pointed out. Details, Tanner muttered. Nancy immediately switched tactics, stepping closer to Officer Martinez with what she clearly believed was a charming smile. Officers, surely we can resolve this. Neighbor to neighbor. I'm sure Mr. Hanley doesn't want to press charges. I absolutely want to press charges, I said flatly. You vindictive little man, Nancy snapped. This is about those shutters, isn't it? No, Nancy. This is about your son breaking into my home. After you provoked him with your constant violations, Ma'am, Officer Chen cut in firmly. We need to take your son to the station. You're welcome to follow us there. As they guided Tanner toward the door, he glanced back at me with a sloppy grin. This isn't over, bro. My mom's going to destroy you. Tanner, shut up, Nancy hissed. But he was already on a roll. Yeah, she's got plans. She already called her lawyer about putting a lien on your house, and she's going to get you kicked out of the neighborhood. She's got a whole file on you, Tanner. Nancy shrieked. What? It's true, he said, oblivious to her panic. You told me you were gonna make his life hell until he moved. You said you were going to. That's enough, Officer Martinez said, firmly ushering Tanner out the door. Ma'am, that sounded a lot like conspiracy to harass. You may want to call that lawyer for yourself. Nancy stood in my doorway, trembling with rage, watching her son still in my bathrobe and wearing the Burger King crown get placed into the squad car. The sight was so bizarre it barely felt real. This isn't over, she hissed at me. "Nancy, get off my property," I said calmly, "or I'll have you arrested for trespassing too." She stormed out, slamming my door so violently that a picture fell off the wall. I spent the next hour giving my statement to a third officer who arrived to document the scene. I showed him the security footage from my cameras, Tanner trying the door handle, realizing it was locked, moving to a window, jimmying it open, and climbing inside. The footage showed him wandering through my home for nearly 2 hours before I arrived, eating my food, drinking my beer, and eventually wearing my bathrobe. The officer photographed everything: the empty bottles, the mess in the kitchen, the taco seasoning still spilled across the floor. He was thorough and professional, and assured me that with this level of evidence, the charges would stick. "Between you and me," he said quietly, as he left, "we've had complaints about the Dropbox before. Nothing solid enough to act on. But this is solid." By the next morning, the entire neighborhood knew. Ring doorbell footage of Tanner being arrested in his boxers and a Burger King crown had already landed on the neighborhood Facebook page. Someone set it to the cops' theme song, and it racked up over 200 reactions within hours. Nancy attempted damage control. She sent out an emergency HOA newsletter declaring that I had entrapped her son and that the arrest was part of my plot to undermine HOA leadership. She also called an emergency board meeting that evening, no doubt to rally support. The meeting was packed. I had never seen so many residents at an HOA gathering before. Nancy sat at the center of the folding table as usual, though her two fellow board members looked noticeably uneasy. "As you all know," Nancy began, voice tight with barely disguised rage, "there was an incident last night involving my son and Trevor Hanley." "You mean when your son broke into his house?" someone yelled from the back. "Alleged break-in," Nancy corrected sharply. "Tanner was conducting an authorized HOA inspection at 10:30 at night, drunk, in his underwear?" another resident asked. "The timing and attire are irrelevant," Nancy said stiffly. "The point is that Trevor Hanley has been carrying out a smear campaign against this HOA board." I stood up. "I'd like to respond to that accusation." "You're out of order," Nancy snapped. But one of the other board members, a quiet woman named Patricia, spoke up softly. "Actually, I think we should hear him out." Nancy shot Patricia a furious glare, but the crack in her authority was already visible. "Thank you," I said. "I have here a folder containing every violation and fine received from Nancy over the past 6 months. 73 violations, totaling more than 4,000. I began handing copies around the room. "These include things like my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall and my doormat being worn." A murmur rippled through the room. "I also have documentation showing none of these fines followed proper HOA procedure. No hearings, no review committee, no appeals. Those procedures are outdated," Nancy protested. "They're written in the bylaws," I countered. "The bylaws you swore to uphold as president," I continued. "I also have security footage of Tanner trespassing on my property multiple times over the last 3 months. And Nancy, I have recordings of your voicemails threatening to destroy me if I didn't comply with your unlawful demands." The room erupted in gasps and low chatter. Nancy's face drained to an ashy gray under her makeup. "You recorded me without my consent," she shrieked. "It's a one-party consent state," I said. "Perfectly legal, unlike breaking into someone's house." Patricia cleared her throat. I motioned for a vote of no confidence in our current president. Seconded. Several residents called out immediately. "You can't do this." Nancy screeched, leaping to her feet so fast her chair toppled over. "I've run this HOA for 3 years. I've maintained property values. I've kept this neighborhood from falling apart. Property values have dropped 12% since you took over," someone pointed out. "Because of people like him." Nancy jabbed a finger in my direction. "He refuses to follow the rules." The vote was called. The result wasn't even close. Nancy was removed as HOA president by a margin of 47-3. Only she and her 2 loyal cronies voted to keep her, but the story didn't end there. Tanner's arrest was only the first domino in Nancy's downfall. The next morning, local news picked up the story. The headline, "HOA President's Son Arrested After Breaking into Resident's Home," was simply too irresistible. The fact that video existed of Tanner in his boxers and a Burger King crown being escorted away in handcuffs made it perfect fodder for evening broadcasts. The footage went viral. Someone posted the Ring doorbell video online with the caption, "When your mom runs the HOA, but you still go to jail," within 48 hours. It had over 1 million views. Tanner was formally charged with breaking and entering, criminal trespass, theft, and criminal mischief. His bail was set at $10,000. Nancy paid it instantly, but the stain on their reputation was permanent. Then, other residents began speaking up. Margaret Chan revealed that Nancy had been fined her $500 for putting ethnic decorations in her yard. During Lunar New Year, James Patterson was fined for displaying a pride flag in June. The Washington family received violations for their children's sidewalk chalk drawings. A pattern emerged, one far worse than simple power abuse. Nancy had been deliberately targeting residents based on race, religion, and sexual orientation. Someone forwarded all the evidence to the state's Fair Housing Department. An investigation began. Meanwhile, Tanner's problems multiplied. During his arrest, officers had found something interesting in his pocket: keys. Not his own, but a set of bump keys, tools specifically used for picking locks. Further investigation revealed that my home wasn't the first he had entered. Several neighbors reported missing items over the past year, things they had assumed he had misplaced. Jewelry, cash, prescription medications. A search warrant was issued for Nancy's house and Tanner's room in the guest house. Investigators found property belonging to at least 6 neighbors, including a laptop reported stolen 3 months earlier. Tanner's charges escalated: multiple counts of burglary, possession of burglary tools, and theft. Prosecutors were even considering labeling him a serial burglar, which came with severe penalties. Nancy hired an expensive lawyer for Tanner, but the evidence was crushing. My security footage, combined with the recovered stolen items and neighbors' testimonies, made conviction almost unavoidable, and Nancy's own mountain of problems was only growing. The Fair Housing investigation uncovered years of discriminatory behavior. Nancy kept detailed notes about residents' notations about race, religion, and what she called lifestyle choices. She had systematically targeted anyone who didn't fit her personal image of the neighborhood. The fines began rolling in. The Fair Housing Department levied a $50,000 penalty against the HOA for discriminatory practices, but because Nancy had acted outside her authority, the HOA's insurance wouldn't cover it. Nancy was personally liable. Then came the civil lawsuits. 17 residents filed a class action suit against Nancy personally, accusing her of harassment, discrimination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The attorney representing them turned out to be the same one Nancy had tried to use against me over the shutters. After reviewing the evidence, he switched sides. The district attorney's office got involved when someone pointed out that Nancy's conduct could qualify as racketeering. She had been using her position to extract money through fraudulent fines, which could be considered organized crime under state law. Nancy's house of cards collapsed with breathtaking speed. 3 weeks after Tanner's arrest, Nancy herself was arrested at her home. The charges were numerous: conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and violations of federal fair housing laws. The image of her being led away in handcuffs screaming about her rights as an HOA president hit the local news and quickly joined Tanner's arrest in infamy. Her bail was set at $100,000. She had to put up her house as collateral. The criminal cases moved slowly but inevitably. Tanner, facing overwhelming evidence and a possible 15-year sentence, took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of burglary and 1 count of breaking and entering. His sentence: 3 years in state prison, parole eligibility after 18 months. Nancy's case was more complicated. Her lawyer argued she genuinely believed she had the authority to do everything she did, that she was just an overzealous board president trying to maintain community standards. But the piles of evidence documented discrimination, fraudulent fines, and harassment were too damning. Prosecutors offered her a deal: plead guilty to 1 count of extortion and 1 count of violating fair housing laws, and they would drop the RICO charges. She would face 2 to 5 years in prison plus substantial fines. Nancy refused the deal. She insisted on going to trial, convinced a jury would understand she was simply protecting property values. Her attorney tried to dissuade her, but Nancy had never been good at admitting she was wrong. The trial was a disaster. Resident after resident took the stand describing her harassment, discriminatory targeting, and abuse of power. The prosecution displayed her own notes, exposing clear patterns of bias and fraudulent conduct. I testified about the shutters, the barrage of fines, and finding Tanner in my home. I presented documentation, played her threatening voicemails, and showed the security footage. The jury's disgust became increasingly visible. Tanner was brought in front the county jail to testify. 2 months behind bars had stripped away his swagger. The former cocky man-child who had once bragged about HOA immunity now looked scared and worn down in his orange jumpsuit. The prosecutor asked about his break-in at my house. My mom said it was okay. Tanner mumbled. She said Mr. Hanley was a problem, and we needed to teach him a lesson. Did she specifically tell you to break into his house? She said to do whatever it took to make him leave the neighborhood. She said the HOA owned everything anyway, that the residents were just renters who didn't know it. NY's lawyer objected furiously, but the damage was done. Tanner went on to describe how his mother had encouraged him to harass residents she didn't like, how she created fake violations to generate revenue, and how she kept a list of residents she wanted to force out. She called it the purge list. Tanner said, anyone who challenged her or didn't fit her image of the neighborhood went on the list. The prosecutor produced the list found on NY's computer. My name was at the top, followed by 24 other residents, most of the minorities or members of the LGBTQ community. Nice's head offense was essentially that she was protecting property values and that everything she did was within her rights as HOA president. Her lawyer brought in a supposed expert on HOA governance, who testified that board presidents had broad authority to enforce standards. The prosecutor destroyed this argument by simply reading from the actual HOA bylaws, which clearly limited the president's authority and required due process for all fines and violations. Nancy had been operating completely outside the scope of her position for years. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: extortion, fraud, conspiracy, and violating federal fair housing laws. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Andrea Kellerman, listened to victim impact statements for 2 hours. Resident after resident described how Nancy had made their lives miserable, how they considered moving just to escape her tyranny, how she'd targeted them for who they were rather than anything they'd done. Margaret Chen broke down crying as she described how Nancy had made her feel unwelcome in her own home, and her children had asked why the mean lady didn't like them. James Patterson talked about how Nancy had tried to find him for flying a pride flag during Pride Month, claiming it was a non-approved banner. The Washingtons revealed that Nancy had called Child Protective Services on them twice, claiming neglect because their children played in the front yard unsupervised when they were watching from the window. When it was NY's turn to speak, she showed no remorse. She stood up in her best designer suit and delivered a speech about how she'd been persecuted for trying to maintain standards, how the neighborhood would fall apart without her leadership, and how this was all a conspiracy orchestrated by me because I couldn't handle being told to follow rules. Judge Kellerman was not impressed. Miss Drebuck, the judge said, you took an oath as HOA president to serve your community fairly and within the bounds of the law. Instead, you used your position to terrorize your neighbors, discriminate against minorities, and line your pockets with fraudulent fines. You showed no respect for the law, for your neighbors, or for basic human decency. You perverted what should have been a simple community organization into your personal thief. You weaponized bureaucracy against people whose only crime was existing in a way you didn't approve of. I hereby sentence you to 7 years in federal prison for violating fair housing laws, 5 years in state prison for extortion, torn concurrently. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $200,000 to the affected residents and a fine of $100,000 to the state. NY's face went white. 7 years, she gasped. Your lack of remorse and the severity of your actions warrant the maximum sentence. Judge Kellerman said, you systematically a community's peace for your own ego and profit. 7 years is lenient. Nancy collapsed into her chair, finally understanding that her reign of terror was over. As the bailiffs approached to take her into custody, she turned to look at me with pure hatred in her eyes. This is your fault, she hissed. No, Nancy said quietly. This is yours. She was led away in handcuffs, her designer heels clicking in the courtroom floor for the last time. 7 years in federal prison, over $300,000 in fines and restitution. Her house would have to be sold to pay for its all. Her life, as she knew it, was over.